So some of the things that we're going to need to create our mitered box are, we're going to need a tape measure, a square, a nice sharp pencil for drawing crisp, clean lines. Dull pencil doesn't work very well. Some masking tape for our clamp, you'll see that later, and some glue for our glue up. Ruler may come in handy as well. And lastly, our piece of wood. This piece of wood has been fully dressed already. It's been cut to rough length. It's been jointed on a face and an edge, so reference face, reference edge. It's been planed to thickness, and it's been ripped to its final width. And then it was cross-cut again to square up the ends so that we can use these as reference ends. So it's fully referenced. If you need to learn how this is done, see the stock breakout video also on my YouTube channel. It is very, very useful, and it's the fundamentals of all things woodwork. So if you need to brush up on some of those skills, check that out too. But we're not going to go into detail on that. You should know that by now. So first thing we want to do is we want to make the four sides of our box. Okay, we're going to make a rectangular box with two long sides and two short sides. So we can think of one short side and one long side as half of our box. So if we take half of our material, this is about 24 inches. If I consider a couple saw blades, I'm going to lose a little bit of material over here. If I think of half of it as about 12 inches, and then we can go about 12 and 3/8. This is just rough work right now. So now I have to think, I want to get one long side and one short side out of this. So if I make a box that's about 4.5 roughly on the short side, it's a pretty small piece. But yeah, then about 7.5, 4.5 by 7.5. It'll be a small box, but that's okay. Sure. So let's make this one 4.5 and this one 7.5. So I'm going to measure out 4.5 inches, use my square, square that line across, nice sharp pencil. I'll have to remeasure this one because I just did that rough. Okay. So here we are at the table saw. We need to cut our miter cuts. We're gonna work from both ends in toward the center. But we need to set our blade to 45 degrees. Beautiful. So now I'm going to cut the other end. So we have two nice crisp miters, one on each end. Now I can cut my 4-inch piece, or 4.5-inch piece, but I wouldn't want to cut this on the same angle because then I would end up with a trapezoid instead of, well, I would end up with a parallelogram instead of a trapezoid. So we want our angles to oppose each other. So now I need to have the piece that I want to keep on this side. And we would line this up exactly the same way. We would want this pencil line to line up with the top edge of where the table saw blade would go through our jig. And just to be sure that I get both of these pieces exactly the same length, I need a stop block. One of the most consistent ways to get pieces exactly the same is using stop blocks. So clamp a stop block in place, run this up against there. I'm going to need to hold this a little bit awkwardly in here, but this is pretty safe. So there's one piece, trapezoid. And now, because this one already has a miter cut on the end, I can also do the exact same cut on this one. And there we go. So remember how I told you I wanted for the grain to wrap around? Right now this miter is the wrong way for a grain to be able to wrap around. We would need for it to be cut the opposite direction. So if we flip this around this way, we can remove our stop block now because it has created two pieces that are the exact same length, and we can put them back to back to double check that everything's square, that we're cutting square. So those pieces are finished. I'll set them aside. I can remove my stop block, and I need to recut these angles to the correct angle, removing as little material as possible. So now, because I've cut the correct angles, you can see that as I wrap this around and glue this miter together, if I could see grain in the corner, I could wrap it all the way around and it would have that continuity. It would look really nice, and you don't have a break in the consistency and look of your project. This creates a really nice finish. So we can measure right off of our miter, and actually that's a more effective way to do it. If you're starting the process of measuring to cut your final pieces like this, realistically I should have cut a miter on there first and then measured my 4.5, because it would have been a little bit easier. So we're going to go with 7.5. I only need to do the layout on one side to cut one of the long ends, the long sides of the box, because I'm going to set up a stop block once I've got it in the right place. So right there, set up my stop block for this side again. Put it nice and firmly in place so it's not going to move, and then we're good to go. Just out of the way. And this is the edge I want. It's got the correct miter on it. We're going to run that up against our stop block and cut this end off. And there we have it. If you want to end up with a square box in the end, it's absolutely imperative that all of your pieces that are supposed to be the same length are exactly the same length, and your miters are actually cutting at 45 degrees. Otherwise, you end up with gaps in the corners, or you end up with a parallelogram where the box is not square in the corners. And if you've cut all your pieces correctly, but you glue it up out of square, every single corner will be out of square.